Greetings and welcome back for another Music Theory Bite. In this video, I'm going to show you how to realize a basic figured bass exercise. If that sounds like something you'd like to learn more about, then this is the video for you. So what is a figured bass exercise? Well, figured bass was a notational tradition common in the Baroque era of music, roughly from 1600 through the mid-1700s. Although some composers used it even a little bit later than that. It consists of a musical bass line with numbers or symbols written underneath it, which would tell the musician how to fill in the chords, what chords to play underneath a given melody. Typically it was used mostly for accompanimental figures. So the organist or the harpsichordist, the keyboardist, would take a look at this, see the melody line, see the bass line, and know what notes to fill in on the inner part of the texture to create a full musical fabric. It's still taught in modern music theory courses today because it's a valuable skill to have, although it's very different than some of the other skills that are being taught today. First of all, you don't really need to know a whole lot of harmony to effectively realize a figured bass, although the more knowledge of harmony that you have, the more it helps and the more effective you're going to be. You do need to know some basic part writing rules. So if you're ready, let's take a look at a figured bass exercise and figure it out. So what you see before you is a figured bass exercise that I pulled off the web. It consists of a couple of parts. First, we have a bass line, and we have the figures written below the bass line. So a large part of the battle of figuring out how to do one of these things is being able to read these figures and interpret them. Now there are lots of different figured bass systems that were in existence back in the Baroque era when this was the tradition, but modern figure bass tends to use some standard conventions, and this one adheres to that. We've also been given a starting voicing for our first chord. Now oftentimes I refer to these things as basically ready to go. That is, if you can read the figures and interpret them, then you can figure this out without having a whole lot of harmony knowledge, although the harmony knowledge definitely helps and makes this a lot faster. This particular exercise has a decent amount of chromaticism, and it looks to me like it modulates from our initial key of F minor to A flat major. And I'm circling over here the end. I see that final cadence, and that definitely looks like a final cadence in the key of A flat major, and this definitely looks like it starts in F minor. So if harmonically this is getting a little bit ahead of what you understand, don't worry too much about it. I will have videos on all the topics such as modulation and the chromatic chords that are going to show up in here. I'll have those ready to go and posted on my channel sometime in the near future. For now, just try to keep up with me as far as the part writing goes and as far as how to interpret the figured bass symbols. So this is our basic figured bass pattern here, and the first step is to take a look at this and figure out what key you're in. I already did that by taking a look at it and seeing what the elements were there, and oftentimes it helps if you can hear or sing the bass line. Now I don't know if I'm in the right key, but I can at least do something kind of relative to where it is. 1, 7, 6, 4, 5, 4, 5, and that was a sharp 4, that B natural there. 4, 3, 2, and I think I've already modulated by this point, so 1, 7, 1, 4, 5, 5, 1. So it sounds like we've changed keys somewhere in this neighborhood here. And it also sounds to me like we're dealing with two phrases. 1, 7, 6, 4, 5, 4, 5. That sounds like a type of half cadence right there. That is a musical pause in which we're ending on the dominant chord. 4, 3, or 2, 1, 7, 1, 4, 5, 5, 1. And we have a nice cadence in the relative major right there. So I know what it sounds like, and I'm starting to get a sense orally in my head of what might be going on here. Now let's talk about the actual figures. There are a couple of conventions that we need to know, things that are understood. If we wanted to, we could put figures underneath every single note, but that would tend to get a little busy in the structure. And remember, figured bass was a practical musical language intended to help a keyboardist or a lutenist figure out quickly what chords to play to fill in an entire musical texture. So what we really have here are a bunch of shorthand figures for representing what actually goes on. What these figures represent are intervals above a given bass note. You've been given the bass note, and so this tells me I'm going to have a sixth above the bass note. This one I'm going to have a sixth and a fifth above the bass note, and this one I'm going to have a sixth and a fourth above the bass note. Here I will have a sixth, a fifth, and a third above the bass note. So understanding the basic numbers is a good starting point. Now we could do that for all of the notes. We could put full figures underneath everything. But since this was a practical system designed to help a keyboardist or lutenist or some type of musician realize the musical fabric in real time, they realized that having a shorthand system was actually more practical. You didn't have to read as much. And so the shorthand system works like this. If you see a bass note with nothing underneath it, that's actually shorthand for 5-3, or if I were to put a fifth and a third above this, it would end up being a root position triad, and the given note is the root of the chord. If I see a note with just a 6 underneath it, that is shorthand for 6-3. That is, a musician would look at it and understand that the 3 is implied. So if I were to take this and put a sixth and a third above it, a third would get me in this case an F, and a sixth would get me a B flat, D flat, F. That is a first inversion triad. And if I did this enough, I could extrapolate that all notes with a single 6 underneath them would represent first inversion triads. 6-4 represents a second inversion triad. With seventh chords, we have a little bit more information to dig out of there. First, if it's in root position, we're simply going to have the number 7, which is short for 7-5-3, or a root position seventh chord. Again, these are all diatonic intervals above the given bass note. For first inversion, I use the numbers 6-5. The missing element of this is the number 3, which is implied. So we're going to have a sixth, a fifth, and a third above this, which will end up being a first inversion seventh chord. We don't have any second inversion seventh chords in this example, but if we did, the numbers would be 4-3, which is short for 6-4-3, second inversion seventh chord. And if we see the numbers 4-2, that represents a third inversion seventh chord, because it's short for 6-4-2. So that takes care of the basic numbers that we're likely to see in a figured bass exercise. Now, we have some other symbols in here which also we need to deal with. First of all, if we see an accidental, that tells us what to do to that particular interval above the given bass note. So for example, this one here, I see a natural 3. That means the third above this pitch, which is an E flat normally, needs to have an accidental, a natural put on it, so it's going to be an E natural. In this case, since it's just a 3, that's implying a 5-3 or root position triad. Over here I have another natural 3, which tells me that the third above this B natural, whatever it happens to be, needs to have a natural put on it. So in this case, since D flat is the normal diatonic third above the given pitch, and I have a natural on that number, that means I'm going to put a D natural above that B natural. The other figure we have to deal with is this plus after the 4. It shows up in two places. And what that means is whatever note that is a fourth above the given bass note is going to be raised by a half step. So if I take a look at the first one here, a fourth above an E flat is an A flat in this case. Remember, these represent diatonic intervals, and the little figures here, the symbols, tell us what to do to add chromatic alterations. So in this case, an A flat is the diatonic 4, and I'm going to want to raise that by a half step because of the plus, so I'm going to have an A natural there. Over here, B flat is given. I want a 4 above that, which is going to be some type of E flat, and then I want to raise it because of the plus after it, so I'm going to be using an E natural there instead of an E flat. So I can interpret the figures, so now it's time for me to start to figure out how to put the entire musical texture together. There are a couple of ways to do this. Ordinarily in a figured-bass situation, if you were doing a real performance off of figured bass, the melody line would be given to you, and then you'd just be filling in the inner voices. In this case, no melody line was given. Some music theory teachers would say, go ahead and fill in your melody line first, and then you can fill in the inner voices based on the figures. And I think that's a fine way to start if you have a particular reason for doing that. In this case, since no melody was given, you can also start by just realizing the chords, and as long as you're keeping an eye on how the melody works and you're willing to be a little bit flexible with that and go back and make some alterations along the way, you can make this work simply by starting at the beginning and doing your part writing all the way through. One of the things you're going to want to know how to do, of course, is basic part writing, and of course I have a video on that. You should check that out before you go further in this video, because you're going to need some of that information. Now once again, this thing is a little bit chromatic, so that means that I'm likely to be dealing with chords in here that you aren't familiar with, and you can check out my videos on some of those specific things. I'll try to refer to those as we go through the exercise. Alright, so let's get started actually realizing this thing. The first step is to keep track of what Roman numerals I'm dealing with as I go through this thing. So if I take a look at this, I see my first chord is given. It is an F minor triad, and I know I'm starting in F minor because it sounded like it when I sang the bass line through. So I will start by calling this what it is, and that is a tonic chord. I'm going to go ahead and label this as I go through, and I'll just move these labels down here. I'll do some notations as I'm working on this. Now, when I get to the second chord, I see the 4 plus over 2. Immediately my first thought is that is a 7th chord in third inversion, because 4-2 is the figured bass symbol for any 7th chord in third inversion. That means that E flat is the 7th of the chord, and I'm going to need the following notes. E flat's already given, so I'm going to need an F, I'm going to need an A flat, I'm going to need a C, and of course I already have my E flat there. So these are the notes I need to fill out this chord. The E flat is given, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that one. Now, I can take a look at the notes that I already have over here, and I'll notice that I have an F, I have an A flat. Oh, excuse me, I forgot about this plus here. It's not an A flat C, it's an A natural C. I have an A flat, which might move nicely to an A natural, and I have a C. So I have a bunch of common tones. Before I actually do the part writing of this, I might even try to figure out, based on these notes, F, A, C, and E flat, what is the actual chord. And if I take a look at this, it is a modified 1 chord. It's a 1 chord that is a dominant 7th quality. So in this case, what I'm dealing with is a 5-7 of 4, or actually a 5-4-2 of 4, since we are in inversion here. So I'm going to go ahead and take that, and that is my Roman numeral for this. It's a secondary dominant. If you don't understand what secondary dominants are, make sure you check out my video on that. Alright, so I'm going to keep common tones as much as possible. So my C is a common tone, and my F is a common tone, and my A flat, that just leaves that one to chromatically slide up to an A natural. A nice chromatic line there. I'm going to get rid of my notes there. Now, I see I have a 5-4-2-4, and I'm moving to a triad in first inversion. I know that because 6 is the hallmark of a first inversion triad. I also know, based on what I know about secondary dominants and resolving any dominant 7th chord, because a secondary dominant is a dominant 7th chord. I know how to resolve those things. I have a video on that one, so you should check that one out. I first find the leading tone, the 3rd of the chord. In this case, it's the pretend leading tone because this is a secondary dominant, and I resolve that up by step. Leading tone leads to the pretend tonic in this case. Next, I find my chord 7th, which has been taken care of in my bass line, which steps down. Next, I find my pretend scale degree 2, which is this note right here, which then steps down. And that leaves my remaining tone, my pretend scale degree 5, which, since it's not in the bass, will stay right where it is. And I have a resolution of a secondary dominant, and this thing is a 4/6 chord. That is a 4 chord in first inversion. So far so good, no problems yet. Next, I see a figure 6/5, and that means I'm dealing with a first inversion 7th chord. So as I take a look at this, first inversion means the 3rd of the chord is in the bass. That's my B flat, that's the 3rd of the chord, which means my other chord tones, the root would have to be a G, go down a 3rd from the given bass note. I have my B flat. I next need a D flat, and I need an F. So those are my chord tones. I already have a B flat taken care of in the texture. I now need a G, a D flat, and an F. Alright, so taking a look at where I have some of these tones already, I already have an F, so I'm going to go ahead and put that in as a common tone. And now I need a G and an D flat. So I'm going to go ahead and move my soprano down to the G, give it a little bit of motion there, and I'm going to compress the texture quite a bit. I'm going to go for a D flat right there in my tenor. I'm going to space this out a little bit so I have a little bit more room. And taking a look at this, in this particular key, G, B flat, D flat, F, that is a 2/6/5. So I'm going to go ahead and fill that in. We have a 2 half diminished 6/5. Alright, so there we go. So far my chord progression is making a lot of sense. 1 to secondary dominant, modification of 1, followed by a 4, followed by a 2. Everything looks good. Alright, make a C, which means that this is a second inversion triad. C is the 5th of the chord, which means that my root is going to be down a 5th from there. So I'm going to need an F, I'm going to need an A flat, and I have one C, and since it's a second inversion triad, check out my video on those. I know I'm going to need 2 C's there. Whenever I see the number 6/4, I always think to myself, what kind of 6/4 chord is this? Remember, if it's not passing, neighboring, or cadential, then you really should think about rewriting it. Since this exercise has been given to me, I'm going to assume that whoever wrote this knows what they're doing with 6/4 chords, and so I'm going to guess, since it's also on a strong metric position, we're dealing with a cadential 6/4. So I'm going to be looking for, and sure enough, I have the notes F, A flat, C, starting in the key of F minor. That would be a 1/6/4, cadential 6/4. All right, so taking a look at the part writing for this, I already have an F in my alto, so I'm going to keep that right where it is. I need an A flat and a C. And as I take a look at this, I notice that my bass is stepping into the C, so I want to go contrary motion to get to the doubled note. So I'm going to put my other C in my tenor, and that will leave my soprano to step up to an A flat. And there's my 1/6/4 chord. So I'm going to get rid of that, and I will go ahead and put in my Roman numerals. Alright, so now we are ready to handle this funny looking chromatic chord here. So 6/5/3. So 6/5 tells me that this is a first inversion 7th chord. The 3 is only there because it's modified in some way, and so they put that in there rather than leaving it out using the shorthand version to show that modification on that particular pitch. So if it's a first inversion 7th chord, That means the given pitch is the third of the chord. That means if I go down from that B natural, my root is a G. I've got my B natural. Go up a third from that, that's that natural 3. That would be a D flat ordinarily, but since I have the natural there, it's going to become a D natural, and that means that seventh of the chord is going to be an F. So my 4 notes are G, B, D, and F. All right, so let's see what we can do with this. With G, B, D, and F, that means that I'm going to again be looking for where are my common tones. I have my F right there. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of them as I find them. I have my D natural, of course, in the bass. Since I have a double tone here, I want to move in contrary motion to get away from that, which means I'm going to move my tenor up to my D natural, which means I am left only with one note to deal with, and that is going to be my G in the soprano. So here, this lovely little chromatic chord, G, B, D, F, which is a dominant 7th sound, and in fact in this case, my Roman numerals, another secondary dominant. This is a 5, 6, 5 of 5, leading to my half cadence. So I'm going to drag that down here. There is my secondary dominant, which now should lead me to the cadence of this first phrase, which is a scale degree 5 in the bass. I've got this natural 3, which means this is showing me that there's going to be a modification to the 3. If I were to not have it modified at all, I could just take this natural 3 out, and this would show me that this is a root position triad of some type. And as I take a look at this, this is where my knowledge of harmony helps out quite a bit. I see that it moves on an offbeat to a 4-2 position, which means that my root of the chord slides down to the 7th of the chord, and the root doesn't change, because if this is the 7th of the chord, I go up a step to find my root. So my root is still going to be a C. So whatever I come up with here is most likely going to stay for the entire rest of the measure. So this means triad in root position, raise the third. In the minor mode, of course, that third is the leading tone. So I'm going to want to keep track of that. So since it's going to fill up the rest of the measure, I think what I can do here is use half notes to fill in this texture up here. If I wanted to, I could use quarter notes or dotted quarter eighth to keep the rhythm the same. Now, since I know this is a dominant chord, this is the root of the chord, and it's a root position triad, I'm going to go ahead and fill in my Roman numeral. This is going to be a 5. When I'm getting into a 5 chord in the minor mode, I always want to try to approach that leading tone from above. So in this case, I find the note above the leading tone, which is my F. I'm going to slide down into my E natural. The remaining tones, if this is my root, I need a C, I need an E, which I just put in, I need a G, which is sitting there in the soprano, ready to go, and I need another C. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in the tenor, once again getting to the double note by contrary motion. Now as I move over here, this 4 plus over 2, which means this is a 7th chord in 3rd inversion. That means the root is a C, which I already have. The plus means a 4th above this B flat, which is an E flat, gets raised, making it an E natural. The 2nd above it is the C, and that just leaves the remaining tone, which is this G, which can stay right where it is. So in this case, this now becomes a 5, 4, 2. Now this is roughly where my modulation happens. Actually, it's going to happen on this next chord here because we see the accidentals starting to disappear. And from here we're going to move to something with a 6 underneath it, which means a first inversion triad, which means that my notes are, the root of this chord is going to be an F. I already have my A flat in the bass. That means I'm going to need a C. And I'll worry about the doubled note here in a little bit. This is a dominant 7th chord, and so I need to make sure that I resolve it like I resolve any dominant 7th chord. I have a video on that. I find my leading tone, and that lead steps up. I find my chord 7th, and that steps down. Sure enough, that's been taken care of in the bass. I find my scale degree 2 here in the soprano, and I move that down to scale degree 1, my pretend scale degree 1 if it's a secondary dominant, and I find my scale degree 5, and if that's in an inner voice, as it is here, it stays right where it is, and it moves to a 1, 6. So we'll go ahead and put that in here. All right, now here's my modulation. Since all my accidentals disappear, I'm going to go ahead and double label this one. This is also, in this case, an F minor chord, so that is going to be in the key of A flat, a 6, 6. We'll call that our pivot for now. That should work. And again, if you don't understand the harmony behind that, just make sure you check out my video on basic modulation. That will explain how all of that works. All right, now I go on to a 6, 5 underneath here. By the way, one of the ways that I knew that the accidentals disappear is I don't see any of these funny symbols over here, back in the minor mode, where I have the chromatic chords and I have the leading tones that are all shown by these funny symbols. They all disappear. These are just straight numbers from here on out. All right, so this means I have a 7th chord in first inversion. I know that because that's what the number 6, 5 means. So that means the root of this chord is going to be an E flat. The third, the G, is already there. That means I also need a B flat and a D flat to fill out the chord. Now, as I take a look at this, I'm going to try to figure out how to get the voice leading to work smoothly in here. This is the place that looks like I might have the most difficulty. So I'm going to be looking for opportunities to make this work. I'm going to go ahead and I might have to redo this in a second, just revoice this, but I'm going to go ahead and start, since I have a unison here, I know those two notes need to move opposite directions. I need an E flat off that F, so I'm going to go ahead and put that there. Oops, got to put it in the right voice. E flat. Now, I also need, I have my G in the bass already, that's given. I need a D flat, in which case if I leapt way up there, that's quite a leap, but I'm closer to it down here, so I think I'm going to go with my tenor voice playing the D flat, and that just leaves my B flat here for the soprano. Double check, make sure I don't have any unwanted parallels or anything, and that looks pretty good. The Roman numeral for this one, since E flat is my root, this looks to me, since I moved into the key of A flat major, this is going to be a 5, 6, 5. Alright, so far so good. This is a dominant 7th chord. Again, I go back to my rules for how to resolve dominant 7th chords. Just going to double check here and make sure everything's working out okay. This is a root position chord, root position triad built on A flat. So my Roman numeral is going to be a 1. As I take a look at this, I find my leading tone, which is my G, and I make that step up. I find my chord 7th, which is my D flat, and I make that step down. I find my scale degree 2, which is in my soprano, my B flat, steps down, and that just leaves my scale degree 5, my E flat, which will stay right where it is. So everything seems to be working fine on that one. And now take a look at this one here, which is a D flat, and it's a triad in first inversion. I know that because that's what the 6 by itself means, which means that the notes that I need for this, I need a B flat as the root, I have my D flat, and that means I also need an F, and I'll worry about doubling here in a minute. So as I take a look at this, I need to find where to put my B flat. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to try that up here in my soprano. Typically on a first inversion major or minor triad, I would double that B flat. I would be approaching it from contrary motion, so that looks okay. And now I need an F, and just need to make sure I don't have any unwanted parallels here, and everything looks okay in that regard. All right, so I have B flat, 2 B flats, D flat, F, and that sure looks to me like that is a 2, 6 chord. Harmonically, just checking this out, everything seems to be working fine. 1, secondary dominant build off of 1 to a 4, to a 2, to 1, 6, 4, to a chromatic chord leading to a 5. The 5 goes to a 1, which becomes a 6 in the new key, which leads me to a 5, which then goes to a 1, which then goes to a 2. I'm now ready to bring this home. Whenever I see 6-4 with an octave drop in the bass, I think this is a cadential 6-4, and so I can just go into very idiomatic mode. I know exactly what I'm going to do with it. So if you know these formulas by heart, then this becomes very easy, very quick to do. So I'm going to go ahead and fill in my Roman numerals. This is a 1, 6, 4, and of course label this the way your theory teacher wants you to label it, followed by a 5, 7, a root position 7th chord built on scale degree 5. Got to be a 5, 7, and of course this whole thing's going to end up on a 1 chord at the end. So you can actually go through and figure out all the Roman numerals first if you want to, just based on the figures that are given to you. The figures will tell you what inversion they're in. You can figure out what the root of each chord is from there, and then figure out what quality of chord would go off of that. All right, so 1, 6, 4 chord means I need to have an A flat, a C, and 2 E flats. One of my E flats is already in the bass, so that leaves me an A flat, C, and E flat left to go. I know based on how formulaic these things are, I'm generally going to step into it in the soprano by stepping down. I can do the same thing in my alto. I can go from my F to my E flat, and that doubles my E flat. That just leaves one more tone to deal with, and that is my tenors get the honor of singing a C. Now that I have that figured out, this is a 1, 6, 4, a very standard idiomatic type of figure. I know that whenever I'm writing this, and of course check out my video on 1, 6, 4 chords, the doubled note, if it goes to a 7th in the chord, will step down. We don't worry about the possibility of parallels in this figure. In fact, everything here is going to step down. My 1 is going to step down to 7, and my 3 is going to step down to 2, and in this case I don't have any unwanted parallels because of the way this thing is voiced. I then can finish this thing out. That's a dominant 7th chord, and I know that all dominant 7th chords resolve a particular way. I find my leading tone, and that, get the rhythmic figure right, steps up. I find my chord 7th, which is my D flat, and that will step down. I'll put this in the right voice. My pretend scale degree 2 also steps down, and my scale degree 5, since it's in the bass, steps up or leaps up to become scale degree 1. So now I think I have it all set. I'm going to back this up here. Ordinarily I would play this on a piano because not only do I want to hear it, but I also want to make sure that I am feeling it. As I play these things, I will oftentimes feel the parallels and feel the mistakes along the way. So I'm going to turn up my volume here, and let's see what this thing sounds like. And that sounds pretty good. Some of these notation programs also have error checking features. They can check for parallel fifths, parallel octaves, those sorts of things. I feel pretty good about my part writing here, and so I think I've come up with a pretty good solution to this. Just going through the steps, reviewing it one more time. When you see a figured bass symbol, the figures tell you the root of each chord and the inversion of each chord, and they represent the diatonic intervals above the given bass line. From that you can figure out what notes go into each chord. Additional figures, additional symbols on there show you chromatic alterations. You can go through and figure out what all the Roman numerals are, even without doing the part writing, by simply taking a look at the figures and understanding what they mean. Nothing under a note is a root position triad. 6 under a note means first inversion triad. 6-4 means second inversion triad. 7th chords are indicated in root position by a 7, in first inversion by a 6-5, in second inversion by a 4-3, I don't have any of those in this example, and in third inversion by a 4-2. Oftentimes these chromatic alterations will simply represent the raising of the leading tone, except when we're dealing with a chromatic chord such as this one here and this one here. Once I figure out what the Roman numeral is, what the chord tones are, then it's a matter of doing some basic part writing, keeping in mind that whenever you have a dominant seventh sound, those resolve in particular ways. And then the other thing to look for is that you have good melodic writing, especially in your soprano line. In this case, I wasn't given a soprano line, and this one worked out quite, quite nicely. You might even want to sing that just to make sure that your melody line is a pretty good melody line. Well, that does it for this video. If you found it helpful, make sure you like it. Feel free to leave constructive comments below. And as always, to stay up on the latest music theory bites as they become available, make sure you subscribe to my channel. Until next time.